If someone had told me that a ruthless mafia boss would take me under her protection and love me without condition, I would have fainted in disbelief. The news of the hit on the Ricci couple was a dull, insignificant thrum in the underworld's cacophony, a minor chord in a symphony of violence that Valentina Moretti conducted with an iron will. It reached her in her study, a room that smelled of old leather, gun oil, and expensive whiskey. The walls, lined with books she'd read and ledgers she'd bled over, had heard whispers of far greater tragedies. The Greeks, she said, her voice a low, uninterested hum. She didn't look up from the financial report she was scrutinizing, her finger tracing a line of numbers that didn't add up. The ones who were expanding into the West Docks, her consiglia. A man named Dante Marino, with a face like a mournful bloodhound, nodded. The Vucci family made their point. Massili, Valentina Moretti's lips, painted a blood red that was both warning and weapon, curved into a faint, disdainful smirk. Amateurs stepping on the toes of bigger amateurs. A predictable outcome. Clean it up if it spills into our operations. Otherwise, it's not our circus, not our monkeys. The Ricci name meant nothing to her. They were ghosts already, just another stain on a city that was more stained than city. It was an hour later, as she was pulling on her black leather gloves, ready to depart for a meeting that would decide the fate of a shipping lane, that Dante Marino re-entered. His demeanor had shifted. The professional detachment was gone, replaced by a subtle unease. There's a complication, Valentina Moretti. She paused, one glove perfectly snug, and raised a single, perfectly sculpted eyebrow. A complication was an expense. A complication was a delay. She hated complications. The Ricci couple. They had a child. A daughter, Maya, 20 years old. The air in the room didn't change, but something in Valentina did. A single, almost imperceptible tightening of the muscles along her jaw. An orphan was not a complication. It was a statistic, a vulnerability, a loose end that rival gangs, the Vuccis especially, would not hesitate to tie up permanently. It was bad business. It drew police attention. It was messy. Find her, Valentina commanded, her voice colder now, the warmth of the whiskey gone from it. Before the vultures do. I want to know where she is. The order was given out of cold, pragmatic calculus. A missing S even to a minor operation was a token. She could be a pawn, a bargaining chip, or simply eliminated to tidy the board. Valentina told herself it was merely strategic housekeeping. The report came back faster than expected. The girl wasn't at her relatives or her friends. She had vanished from the system entirely. And then a low-level soldier, one of hers who volunteered at a local animal shelter for community service. A clever way to foster goodwill, reported a sighting. A young girl, dark-haired and hollow-eyed, had been coming every day, sitting in the cat room, speaking to no one. Something, impulse she could not name and would never admit to, compelled Valentina to see for herself. Strategy, she told herself. To assess the asset, she went in disguise, a simple feat, a dark wig, casual clothes that felt alien against her skin, the absence of her signature red lipstick making her feel strangely naked. She looked like any other wealthy anonymous woman, perhaps looking to adopt a pet. The shelter was a place of faint echoes and desperate hope, smelling of antiseptic and kibble. It was a world away from her own of polished marble and credite. And then she saw her Maya. She was curled in a corner of the communal cat room, knees drawn to her chest, her small frame looking utterly broken. She wasn't just crying. She was weeping with the raw, ragged abandon of someone who had nothing left. Her tears fell onto the scratched linoleum floor, and a motley crew of cats had gathered around her, not with alarm, but with a strange, quiet solemnity. They seemed to understand this was a grief too big for words. Valentina stood frozen in the doorway, a specter observing a tragedy she had deemed irrelevant just hours before. She watched as Maya whispered to the cats, her voice a shattered thing. They said not to come home. I didn't listen. I should have been there. The words were a gut punch. This wasn't just an orphan. This was a child living a nightmare of guilt and terror. And then it happened. A tiny ginger kitten, bold where the older cats were cautious, wobbled forward. It nudged its head against Maya's trembling hand. When she didn't pull away, the kitten did something that stole the air from Valentina's lungs. It stretched up on its hind legs, and with a heartbreaking tenderness began to lick the tears from Maya's cheek. The gesture was one of pure, uncomplicated empathy, a tiny creature offering the only comfort it had. And in that moment, the cold, pragmatic calculus that ruled Valentina's life shattered. A protectiveness so fierce and sudden it was like a physical blow rose within her. It was a volcanic rage, not at the Vuches, not at the carelessness of the world, but at the sheer unbearable fact that this child, this girl who wept where kittens licked her tears, was alone and afraid of it. The memory of that slight mercy from a creature labeled wild burned itself into her being. Her leathered gloves, which had inked executions and engineered ruin, balled into knuckles at her thighs. Her heart, an organ she had believed was forged of frost and stone, gave one aching split. It was the echo of a battlement cracking after decades of siege. Stonework sighed, dust blooming into the cold air of a newly breached keep. The presumed heir to the most feared criminal syndicate in the city stood in a cat shelter, concealed and nameless, and made a wordless oath. The world had failed Maya Ricci. It had stripped all things from her. But Valentina would not. She pivoted on her heel and stepped out, the costume of an unknown passerby shedding with each stride. By the time she reached the waiting black town car, her expression was no longer that of a detached spectator. It had become a visage of cold, terrifying wrath. She slid into the rear seat, the door sealing with a decisive thud that rang like a gavel. She lifted her encrypted phone, her voice low and thrumming with a strange, untested feeling as she gave the order that would alter both their lives for good. The girl Maya Ricci, I don't care how it's done, but secure her and listen to me closely, she hissed, her stare pinned to the shelter's door. No one is to touch a single hair on her head. You will handle her as though she were glass. The world ended for Maya Ricci, not with a blast, but with a squeal of tires and the trace of unfamiliar cologne. She was heading back toward the shelter's cramped rear office. They'd let her sleep on a fold-out cot since it happened. Her body was aching with fatigue that reached deeper than bone. The kindness shown by the staff was a blanket she could not feel. Their gentle words reached her as if through thick, muddy water. She was hollow, a wraith drifting through what remained of her life. The black van was absent 1 second, curb empty the next. The side door slid open with a sound like a sharp inhalation. Hands, hard, impersonal, practiced, seized her. A cry was smothered against a chest that felt like a wall of wool and muscle. She was lifted, her feet flailing uselessly at the air, and then she was within. The door clapped shut, dropping her into near darkness. Panic, hot and scalding, flooded her mouth. Vucci, they'd tracked her. This was it. The thing the police liaison had vaguely cautioned her about. The possibility she'd refused to accept under the bright SAD lights of the shelter. Please, she rasped, the plea a ragged sob. I don't know anything. I swear. No one replied. The men she could trace to large forms in the dim were quiet. Their quiet was more chilling than any threat. A coarse cloth was knotted over her eyes, blinding her. The world narrowed to the engine's roar, the scent of leather and clean sweat, and the terrifyingly steady hold of the man who braced her upright on the bench, not harshly, but with an unyielding solidity that denied any struggle. She expected to be struck, groped, menaced. She prepared for the violence that had claimed her parents, the cruelty she now knew the world could wield. It did not come. The ride seemed endless. Every turn, every halt felt like a prologue to her death. She wept in silence, tears soaking the blindfold, her body shaking with a fierceness she could not master. Her jaw clenched, her stomach turned. The man holding her shifted, and for a heart-stopping second, she thought this was it. Instead, he offered a handkerchief. It was clean, starched, monogrammed with an intricate M. She knocked it away, her breath hitching in terror. Why would her captives offer a handkerchief? The van finally stopped. The door opened, fresh, cold air washed over her, carrying the scent of rain on stone and distant manicured gardens. The hands guided her out, their grip shifting to hold her elbows, steadying her as her knees threatened to buckle. She was led not across gravel or concrete, but over smooth, massive flagstones. A heavy door opened with a deep, well-oiled thud, and she was inside. The air changed. It was warm, still, and smelled of lemon polish and something else, something opulent and faintly floral. Her worn sneakers sank into a pile so thick and deep. It felt like walking on a living thing. Carpet. The silence here was different, too. It wasn't the tense silence of the van. It was the profound, echoing quiet of immense space. She was led up a sweeping staircase, her footsteps muffled. A door opened. The hands released her. The blindfold, a quiet, professional voice said. It was one of the men from the van. She flinched, expecting him to rip it off. Instead, his fingers were surprisingly deft as he untied the knot. The cloth fell away. Maya blinked, her eyes stinging in the light. She was standing in the middle of a room that belonged in a magazine. A room larger than her entire apartment. A crystal chandelier hung from a vaulted ceiling, its light glinting off gilded mirrors and polished dark wood. A four-poster bed, big enough for a family, was piled with pillows and a duvet that looked like a cloud. A fireplace stood cold and majestic on one wall, and French doors led to a small balcony overlooking what looked like acres of private gardens. It was beautiful. It was utterly terrifying. This wasn't a dank basement or a concrete cell. This was a gilded cage. The luxury felt like a mockery, a sick joke. Her mind, frayed and wild, could only process it as a prelude to something unspeakable. This was how monsters softened their prey before the slaughter. The door opened again, and Maya spun around, pressing her back against a silk-covered armchair, her heart hammering against her ribs. A woman stood there. She was not one of the kidnappers. She was older, dressed in a severe, impeccably clean black dress with a white apron. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her face, while not unkind, was utterly neutral. "My name is Eliza Bianchi," she said, her voice a calm, low murmur. "I am the head of household staff. This is your room. Your bathroom is through there." She gestured to a door. "You will find clothes in the wardrobe. They should fit. If they do not, please inform me. Dinner will be brought to you in 1 hour. Is there anything you do not care to eat?" Maya could only stare, her mouth agape. The surreal normality of the question, "Is there anything you do not care to eat?" while she was a prisoner in a palace, was enough to make her dizzy. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice from crying. "Who brought me here? What do you want with me?" Eliza Bianchi's expression did not change. "You are safe. That is all you need to know for now." Before Maya could form another question, the woman left, closing the door with a soft but definitive click. A moment later, Maya heard the distinct sound of a key turning in a lock. A prisoner in a room fit for a princess. She stood frozen. For a long time, simply breathing in the terrifying opulence. She finally stumbled to the bathroom and flipped on the light. It was a marble cavern with a sunken tub and a separate glass-walled shower. Fluffy towels were stacked on a heated rack. On the counter sat unopened toiletries, soaps, lotions, shampoos, all from brands she'd only seen in adverts. She looked at her reflection in the vast spotless mirror. A pale hollow-eyed girl in a cheap cat-haired hoodie stared back, a stark smudge of reality in this impossible fantasy. An hour later, as promised, there was a soft knock. Eliza entered, followed by a younger maid pushing a wheeled cart laden with silver domes. The scent of roasted chicken, herbs, and warm bread filled the room. A cruel assault on a stomach knotted with fear. They set the table by the window, laying out fine china and crystal glacier with silent efficiency. They were just leaving when the main door opened again. This time it was her. The woman moved into the room with an aura that seemed to displace the air itself. She was tall, dressed in a tailored black pantsuit that screamed of power and money. Her hair was a cascade of dark waves, and her face was a masterpiece of sharp, elegant lines and cold beauty. But it was her eyes that held Maya frozen. They were a striking, unusual shade of gold fleck green, and they assessed Maya with an intensity that felt like a physical touch. This was no lackey. This was the source of the power in this place. The woman's gaze swept over the room, the food, and finally settled on Maya, who was still pressed against the bathroom door frame, looking every bit like a cornered rabbit. The woman's red lips parted. Her voice was low, husky, and carried an absolute, unshakable authority that borked no argument. Maya Ricci, she said, and the name sounded like a decree on her tongue. From now on, you are mine. This is your home. You will want for nothing. The words were not a comfort. They were a claim, a branding. Mine. The word echoed in the lavish room, stripping away the pretense of hospitality. She wasn't a guest. She was property. Beautifully housed, lavishly cared for property, but property nonetheless. The dam inside Maya broke. The fear, the confusion, the grief for her parents, the terrifying absurdity of it all. It erupted in a wave of hopeless, body-aching sobs. She slid down the door frame to the floor, burying her face in her hands, her small frame shaking uncontrollably. She cried for everything she had lost, and for the terrifying, unknown future she had just been thrown into. She cried because her kidnapper was the most beautiful and terrifying woman she had ever seen, and because the woman who owned her had just offered her the world, and it felt like a death sentence. The first night was the longest of Maya's life. After the sobs had exhausted themselves into shaky, hiccuping breaths, she'd crawled from her spot on the floor to the giant bed. She didn't undress, merely burrowed under the duvet, which was as light and warm as it looked, and stared into the darkness. Every sound was a threat. The sigh of the mansion's ancient plumbing, the distant muffled chime of a clock, the faint creak of a floorboard in the hall. She expected the door to open at any moment, for her to return and clarify exactly what mine entailed. The luxury of the room felt like a taunt, a beautifully wrapped box with something monstrous inside. But the door remained locked from the outside, and no one came. Dawn broke, painting the lavish room in soft gray light. Maya had maybe slept an hour. Her dreams a fractured montage of her parents' laughter, the ginger kitten, and the woman's green possessive eyes. A key turned in the lock. Maya shot upright, her heart in her throat. It was only Eliza carrying a breakfast tray. The scent of coffee, warm pastries, and fresh fruit was obscenely normal. "Good morning," Eliza said, her tone as neutral as the gray light outside. She set the tray on a table. "The heirs expects you to be dressed for the day after you eat. There are suitable clothes in the wardrobe." "The heirs?" Maya asked, her voice raspy. A flicker of something, surprise, crossed Eliza's stoic face. "You do not know who she is." When Maya shook her head, Eliza merely nodded. "It is better perhaps that you do not. For now, she is the authority here. You would be wise to remember that." Eliza left, and the key turned again. The implied warning was clear. You are both a guest and a prisoner. Behave. The day unfolded with the same surreal rhythm. Maya, driven by a desperate, morbid curiosity, explored the wardrobe. It was filled with clothes, soft cashmere sweaters, perfectly tailored jeans, elegant dresses, all in her exact size. It was a detail that was both impressive and deeply violating. Someone had been watching her very, very closely. Lunch was brought, then dinner. Every course was a small triumph of cooking craft, each brought in by a quiet, capable made under Eliza's oversight. The promised air breaks never came. On the third day, the routine shifted. The door swung inward in the late afternoon, and she appeared. Valentina paused at the threshold, not crossing fully, as if honoring an unseen border. She was dressed differently today, dark tailored trousers and a plain black sweater that looked impossibly soft and expensive. She seemed less a boardroom colossus and more a breathtaking, if severe, aristocrat at her country retreat. Her eyes traveled over Maya, curled in the window seat, staring out at the walled garden, a book she hadn't truly read lying open across her lap. "You are not eating," Valentina said. Her voice wasn't seeking an answer. It was a flat, dissatisfied remark. The lunch tray on the table beside Maya sat largely untouched. Maya flinched at the sound of her voice, wrapping her arms tighter around herself. "I'm not hungry." "That is not an option," Valentina replied, the tone allowing no space for debate. She finally came into the room, her presence making the generous space feel suddenly close. She went to the tray, lifted a bowl of what looked like a rich potato leek soup and a spoon. She stood before Maya. "Eat." It was an order. Maya's defiance, fed by 3 days of fear and confusion, sparked. "Why?" "So I can be healthy and well-kept for whatever you have planned. Why not simply do what you intend to do? Why this charade?" Valentina's eyes narrowed, those gold flecks seeming to kindle. For a frightening heartbeat, Maya thought she had finally crossed a line and would be punished. Instead, Valentina's expression tilted into something like impatience. With a sigh that sounded as though it rose from the bottom of her soul, she sat at the edge of the window seat, her movement composed and precise. She dipped the spoon into the soup, blew on it lightly, a gesture so domestic and absurd it stunned Maya into stillness, and held it at Maya's mouth. "Open," Valentina said, her voice a low rumble. Maya stared, her thoughts short-circuiting. The most frightening woman she had ever met, the woman who had her taken and locked away in a high room, was trying to feed her soup. The world had lost its axis. When Maya didn't move, Valentina's jaw set. "Must I do everything myself?" "You will eat, Maya, one way or another. Your body needs fuel. This is not up for discussion." Hesitantly, driven more by shocked confusion than obedience, Maya parted her lips. The soup was warm, perfectly seasoned, and felt like a betrayal as it went down. Valentina offered another spoonful, then another, her motions efficient yet oddly gentle. Her concentration was total, her brows faintly knit as though this were the most vital duty of her day. When the bowl was half gone, Maya turned away. "I can't, please." Valentina studied her face, and for the first time, Maya saw something in those eyes that wasn't cold authority or irritation. It was a flicker of understanding. She set the bowl aside with a soft click. "The food will stay. You will finish it," she said, though the command had lost its steel. She rose to go, pausing at the door. "This is your home. No harm will reach you here. You have my word." The promise of a kidnapper. It should have meant nothing. Yet the way she said it, with such absolute, immovable conviction, made Maya's throat tighten. Later that night, a different question began to kindle in Maya's mind, stoked by the alarming, bewildering tenderness of the afternoon. Theirs had claimed her, called her mine with a possessiveness that suggested a total lack of boundaries. And yet she had not laid a finger on Maya beyond the necessary act of feeding her. She hadn't even fully entered her space unless she had to. When Eliza came to turn down the bed, Maya, emboldened by soup and confusion, voiced the terrifying question that had been haunting her. "She says I'm hers," Maya whispered, her voice small in the large room. "But she doesn't. She hasn't. I mean, if she owns me, why doesn't she sleep in here?" The question hung in the air, heavy and explicit. It was the core of her fear, the nightmare she'd been waiting for. Eliza stopped, her hands smoothing the already pristine duvet. She turned and looked at Maya, and for the first time, her neutral expression softened into something akin to pity. She walked closer, her voice dropping to a whisper meant for Maya's ears only. "Child," Eliza said, her tone gentle but firm, "you misunderstand entirely. The as. She has her own code, a strange one to some, but it is ironclad. She would never force herself on anyone. It is a line she will not cross. It is beneath her." Maya stared, trying to process this. "Then why? Why bring me here? Why say that?" Eliza's gaze was unwavering. She saw a thing that angered her, a young life shattered by the carelessness of men she considers fools. She does not tolerate waste or injustice, even her kind of justice. She took you because in her mind you are not safe, and now you are. She placed a hand briefly and lightly on Maya's shoulder. "She just wants you safe. Everything else you will have to learn for yourself." With that, Elisa left, and the key turned once more. Maya stood alone in the center of the opulent room, the words echoing around her. She would never force herself on anyone. She just wants you safe. The fear didn't vanish. How could it? She was still a prisoner. But the sharp, jagged edge of her terror, the specific, visceral dread of violation blunted. It was replaced by a profound, staggering confusion. The monster in the castle wasn't acting like a monster. She was acting like a guardian. A grumpy, terrifying, impossibly powerful guardian who fed you soup and promised you safety with the same intensity she might order an execution. The walls of the gilded cage were still there, but they had, in a single whispered conversation, become something far more complex and bewildering. The silence in the mansion was a living thing, but after days of it, Maya had begun to decipher its layers. There was the busy, purposeful quiet of the staff during the day, the deep, watchful hush of the security detail at night, and the profound, isolating silence of her own room. But the silence just before dawn was different. It was a city holding its breath, a blank page not yet written upon. It was in this pre-dawn stillness that her door opened. Maya, who had been drifting in a shallow, uneasy sleep, jolted awake. The figure in the doorway was backlit by the hall sconce, but there was no mistaking the height, the posture, the aura of contained power. Valentina. She was dressed not in a suit, but in dark, expensive-looking athletic wear, form-fitting leggings, and a sleek zip-up jacket that made her look like a panther ready to prowl. Her hair was pulled back in a simple low ponytail. "Get dressed," she said, her voice a low murmur that seemed part of the dawn itself. Warm clothes quickly and quietly. The command brooked no argument, but the fear that once would have spiked in Maya's chest was now tempered with a burning curiosity. Was this it? Was she being moved? Disposed of? The order for warm clothes didn't fit that narrative. She scrambled out of bed, her heart thumping for a different reason. Now, she pulled on the soft jeans and a thick cashmere sweater from the wardrobe, her fingers fumbling with the buttons. Valentina watched from the doorway, a statue of impatience, her arms crossed. When Maya was ready, Valentina gave a sharp, almost imperceptible nod and turned. "Follow me. Do not speak." They moved through the sleeping mansion like ghosts. Valentina's footsteps were utterly silent on the grand staircase, and Maya did her best to mimic her, feeling like an awkward child in comparison. Instead of heading toward the main entrance, Valentina led her down a narrower servants' corridor and out a side door Maya hadn't known existed. Parked in the alley was not a limousine or a black town car, but a sleek matte black SUV, its engine already purring softly. A driver Maya hadn't seen before sat behind the wheel, his eyes forward. Valentina opened the back door and gestured for Maya to get in before sliding in beside her. The drive was conducted in total silence. Valentina stared out her window, her profile sharp and unreadable against the slowly lightening sky. Maya watched the city transform from a place of neon and shadows to one of soft grays and muted golds. They were heading in a familiar direction. A hope, fragile and terrifying, began to bloom in Maya's chest. When the SUV pulled to a stop, it was exactly where she'd prayed it would be, the cat shelter. It looked different in the weak dawn light, smaller, more vulnerable. The closed sign was still up. Valentina got out, and Maya followed. From her pocket, Valentina produced not a key, but a set of lockpicks. With a few deft practice clicks, the main lock disengaged. The casual display of illicit skill sent a shiver down Maya's spine. This was a woman for whom locked doors were mere suggestions. "They open at 9, Valentina said, her voice barely a whisper as she pushed the door open. The familiar smell of kibble, disinfectant, and cat wafted out. "We have to ours." "We," the word echoed in the empty reception area. Valentina moved with the predator's quiet confidence, knowing exactly where she was going. She led Maya back to the communal cat room, the scene of both Maya's deepest despair and the moment that had inexplicably changed her life. The cats, stirred by their entrance, began to emerge from their cubbies and perches, a few meowing greeting. Rubbing against Maya's legs, she crouched down automatically, her hands reaching out to stroke familiar heads, a genuine smile touching her lips for the first time in what felt like forever. But her attention was riveted on Valentina. The heiress stood just inside the doorway, her arms still crossed, as if surveying a business acquisition. She looked out of place, this vision of lethal elegance amid scratching posts and donated toys. Her gaze was sharp, analytical, scanning the room. Maya expected her to wrinkle her nose in distaste, to make some cold remark about the smell or the mess. She did none of those things. Her intense focus landed on a small, timid calico kitten huddled in a corner bed, one of the new arrivals, still skittish around people. Slowly, deliberately, Valentina uncrossed her arms. And then she did something that stole the air from Maya's lungs. Valentina crouched. It wasn't a graceful model's pose. It was a functional lowering of her body, the powerful muscles in her thighs and core coordinating to bring her down to the kitten's level. The motion was so inherently gentle, so devoid of any threat that the kitten didn't flinch. Maya watched, utterly mesmerized, as Valentina reached out. Her hands, which Maya had only seen gesturing commands or holding a spoon with imperious authority, were different now. They moved with a breathtaking slowness and precision. She didn't try to pet the kitten's head. She simply extended her index finger, offering the back of her knuckle for the tiny creature to investigate. The calico kitten hesitated, then stretched its neck, giving a tentative sniff. Valentina remained perfectly, preternaturally still. Not a muscle twitched. She was a statue of patience. After a long moment, the kitten gave a tiny sandpapery lick. A sound escaped Valentina's lips. It was so quiet Maya almost missed it. A soft, almost sigh-like exhale. And then, with a tenderness that made Maya's heart ache, Valentina began to stroke the kitten's cheek with one impossibly gentle finger. The kitten leaned into the touch, a tiny rumbling purr starting up like a miniature motor. In that moment, the formidable armor of the Mafia fell away. The sharp angles of her face softened. The ruthless intelligence in her green eyes was replaced by a simple, profound focus. Here, in a dusty shelter at dawn, crouched before a fragile creature, Valentina was not a queen or a monster. She was just a woman offering a moment of quiet comfort. The juxtaposition was too much. The tension of the past week, the terror, the confusion, and now this staggering, unexpected vision of tenderness. It all coalesced into a single impulsive thought that flew from Maya's lips before she could stop it. So, the scary Mafia queen is actually a catmom. The moment the words were out, she froze. She had just teased her kidnapper. She had called her a catmom. She braced for anger, for cold retaliation. Valentina's head snapped up. The softness vanished from her face, replaced by a familiar, intimidating scowl. Her eyes narrowed, flashing with gold-flecked annoyance. She opened her mouth, no doubt to issue a sharp retort to re-establish the vast distance between them. But she didn't. Instead, something miraculous happened. The corner of her mouth, that stern, beautifully sculpted mouth that seemed only to frown or issue commands, twitched. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible movement, a rebellion against her own controlled expression. A small, reluctant smile escaped, like a sliver of sunlight breaking through a storm cloud. It was there and gone in a heartbeat, ruthlessly suppressed behind a low, dismissive grumble. "Don't be ridiculous," Valentina muttered, turning her attention back to the kitten. But the spell had been broken. The air in the room had changed. A boundary, rigid and fearsome, had been gently, irreversibly crossed. Maya didn't see a monster anymore. She saw a woman of terrifying contradictions. And for the first time since she'd been blindfolded and thrown into a van, Maya felt not fear, but a spark of something else entirely. Something dangerously like fascination. The visit to the shelter cracked something open between them. It wasn't a door flung wide, but a window left ajar, allowing a new, confusing breeze to drift into the stale, controlled atmosphere of Valentina's world. For Maya, it was a revelation. The monster had a soft underbelly, and Maya, who had been drowning in grief and fear, found herself instinctively clutching at it, a lifeline made of unexpected tenderness. She became a shadow, a bubbly, chatty, irrepressible shadow. Where Valentina went, Maya followed. It started tentatively. She would wait outside the study door until Valentina emerged, then fall into step beside her, offering a running commentary on the pattern of the wallpaper or the bizarrely stern portraits of Valentina's ancestors that lined the main hall. Valentina would initially ignore her, her pace never slowing, her expression a mask of cool indifference. But Maya was undeterred. She began to learn the rhythms of the mansion. She learned that Valentina took her coffee, black, no sugar, in the library at precisely 10:15 a.m. after her morning security briefing. Maya started showing up, pulling out the heavy chair opposite her and sitting uninvited. "That guy with a scarred eyebrow," Maya would say, dunking a biscuit she'd pilored from the kitchen into her own milky tea. "He looks like he's constantly smelling something bad. Does he ever smile?" Valentina would slowly lower her newspaper, fixing Maya with a look that made hardened gangsters sweat. Maya would just blink back, her expression one of genuine, innocent curiosity. After a long, tense silence, Valentina would grunt, "No," and raise the paper again, a clear dismissal. But she never explicitly told her to leave. The real turning point was the touch. It happened in the main hallway. Valentina was heading out, shrugging on a long black coat held by a silent attendant. Maya, seeing her preparing to leave, felt a sudden, irrational spike of anxiety. The thought of Valentina disappearing back into the dangerous outside world, the world that had taken her parents, was unbearable. Without thinking, she darted forward and wrapped her arms around Valentina's waist, pressing her cheek against the cool, expensive wool of her coat. The effect was instantaneous and electric. The attendant froze, his eyes wide with sheer terror, as if expecting Maya to be thrown across the room. Valentina herself went rigid, every muscle in her body locked down. She didn't breathe. She was a statue of pure, unadulterated shock. This was a breach of protocol, of personal space, of every unspoken rule that governed her life. No one touched Valentina without permission, ever. Maya, feeling the absolute rigidity of the body she held, squeezed tighter. "Be careful," she mumbled into the wall, her voice small. 3 heartbeats. Nothing happened. The hallway was a frozen tableau. Then Valentina's head turned slightly, her gaze dropping to the top of Maya's head. The look on her face was one of utter bewilderment, as if she'd been presented with a complex puzzle, in a language she didn't understand. Slowly, carefully, as if handling a live explosive, one of Valentina's hands came up. It hovered in the air for a moment before settling stiffly and awkwardly on Maya's back. It wasn't a hug. It was a pat. A single, clumsy, profoundly confused pat. "Release me," Valentina said, her voice a strangled whisper devoid of its usual command. Maya let go. Stepping back, she looked up at Valentina's face, which was a fascinating mask of conflict, annoyance, confusion, and something else, something she was trying desperately to smother. Maya just smiled a little tremulously. "Okay, bye." Valentina left without another word, her stride slightly quicker than usual. After that, the dam broke. Maya seemed to take the awkward pat as a blanket invitation. The hugs became a regular occurrence. She'd ambushed Valentina when she was reviewing security footage, when she was on a phone call, even once when she was in the middle of a tense, low-voice conversation with Dante Marino. Each time, Valentina would go through the same ritual: the initial full-body freeze, the stunned silence, followed by the slow, agonizingly awkward raise of one or both arms to return the embrace, for precisely measured to seconds before extricating herself with a grumble. One afternoon, Maya found her in the conservatory staring out at the rain-lashed gardens, a rare moment of idleness. Maya didn't say a word. She just walked over and wrapped her arms around her from behind, resting her chin on Valentina's shoulder. Valentina sighed, a long-suffering sound. "Must you?" "Yes," Maya said cheerfully. "You're warm and you give good awkward hugs." "I do not give hugs," Valentina corrected, her body still tense. "Hug me back properly, or I'll tell everyone you kiss kittens on their little foreheads when no one's looking," Maya threatened, her voice a playful whisper next to Valentina's ear. Valentina stiffened even further. If that was possible, the threat was absurd, ridiculous, and yet it touched on the very vulnerability she had revealed at the shelter. It was a threat born of intimate knowledge. She grumbled, a low, threatening sound in her chest. But then something shifted. Her hands, which had been hanging stiffly at her sides, came up. This time, they didn't just pat. They settled around Maya, pulling her closer, properly encircling her. It was still a bit stiff, still hesitant, but it was undeniably a real hug. Maya melted into it, a quiet, victorious sound escaping her. "See, was that so hard?" Valentina rested her chin on top of Maya's head, her gaze still fixed on the gray world outside. The rain pattered against the glass. The rigid line of her shoulders relaxed, just a fraction. "You are the most infuriatingly persistent creature I have ever encountered," she muttered, but there was no heat in it. In fact, as she stood there holding the warm, trusting girl in her arms, feeling the steady beat of Maya's heart against her own, a foreign sense of rightness settled over her. The mansion, for all its opulence, had always been cold, a fortress. Now, for the first time it felt, however strangely, like it had a heartbeat, and it was hers to protect. She grumbled again, but her arms tightened their hold, and she secretly, fiercely enjoyed it. The war room was Valentina's sanctuary of control. It was a windowless, soundproof chamber deep in the heart of the mansion, its walls lined with monitors, displaying live feeds from across the city, maps etched with territories in different colors, and a large polished table that had seen more blood packs than business deals. The air was always cool, smelling of ozone from the electronics and the faint, sharp scent of gun oil. Here, she was not a woman. She was a general, a sovereign, a force of nature. Or she used to be. The meeting had been called to address the Vucci family's escalating insolence. They were like cockroaches, scattering when the light hit them, but always scurrying back to nibble at the edges of her empire. Dante Marino stood at the head of the table, laser pointer in hand, outlining their movements near the docks. There, using the old Fischetti warehouse as a staging ground, Dante Marino, in his voice a growly monotone. "We've counted 6 trucks moving through in the last 48 hours. Arms, we believe. Possibly contraband tech." The men around the table, Her capos, her lieutenants, faces scarred by loyalty and violence, leaned forward, their expressions grim. This was a direct challenge. It required a decisive, brutal response. They all looked to her, awaiting the order that would unleash hell. Valentina steepled her fingers, her gaze fixed on the map. The red of the laser hovered over the warehouse. She needed to focus to calculate the response. A show of force, a quiet disappearance of the key players, a burning of the warehouse as a statement. But the red began to blur. Instead of tactical plans, her mind supplied a different image. Maya's face lit with a giggle that morning as she tried to sneak a piece of bacon to one of the mansion's ancient pampered terriers. Under the breakfast table, the way her nose had scrunched up, the sound of her laughter so bright and unburdened it seemed to change the very quality of the light in the room. Focus, she commanded herself, mentally shaking her head. The warehouse, arms, but her mind, a traitorous organ, drifted to scent. What was that scent clinging to Maya? It wasn't perfume. The clothes Eliza issued were scent-free. It was simply her, a clean, warm note, like sunlight on skin with the faint, sweet trace of the strawberry shampoo she preferred. Valentina could almost catch it now, slicing through the sterile, masculine atmosphere of the war room. She shifted in her chair, a tiny adjustment, yet one every man in the room clocked. Valentina never fidgeted. "We could hit the trucks as they roll," offered Enzo Romano, a bear of a man whose knuckles told their own histories. "Ambush them on the coastal highway. Make it messy. Send a warning." A murmur of assent drifted around the table. It was a solid, brutal plan. Vary them. Old school, loud, and bloody. The sort of lesson rivals remembered for years. Still, her mind refused to settle on steel and roots and timing. It kept circling back to heat and breath, and the impossible ease of that embrace. The thought lodged like a splinter, small but maddening, impossible to ignore. Yet Valentina was thinking of warmth. The memory of Maya's body pressed to hers in that ridiculous embrace. In the conservatory, the shocking, pervasive heat of her, bleeding through layers of wool and silken armor straight to skin. A sensation so alien, so utterly at odds with the cold calculus that governed her life that it felt like a brand. She absently rubbed her thumb across her fingertips as if trying to recall the nap of Maya's sweater. Mestra's police. Another capo, Adriano, tallied. "We should strike the warehouse itself. Clean, exact, make it pass for an electrical blaze." A debate flared, voices low and weighty. They were gaming outcomes, balancing lives and margins, while their leader drifted adrift in a sea of unfamiliar, soft impressions. "She is a weakness," a clinical, rational corner of her mind hissed. "A distraction. Remove the distraction." Yet the idea of erasing Maya, of banishing that warmth and light from her citadel, sent a jolt of something that felt perilously like panic through her veins. Unacceptable. The girl was hers. The issue wasn't the girl. It was this softness. She cursed herself inwardly, nails biting her palms. "You are softening. Pathetic boss." Silas's voice sliced through her inward lashing. The entire table had fallen silent. They were all watching her. They had clearly posed a question, and she had not heard it. An unthinkable lapse. Valentina's name stood for raptor-like focus, for missing nothing. She never drifted. Not once. Not ever. Not until this moment. Not acceptable. She settled her features into a mask of glacial impatience. "Repeat the question," she said, voice pitched perilously low. It was Vito Santoro, young, brash, and graced with a survival instinct occasionally worryingly absent. Who broke the taut hush? A slow, incredulous grin slid across his mouth. "Ho, boss," he chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "You smiling? Never thought I'd live to see it. You holding a secret we should know." The oxygen in the room vanished. Valentina's head swung toward him with the slow, lethal precision of a turret taking aim. The faint, unnoticed curve that might have touched her lips was gone, replaced by a look of pure, uncut menace. Vito Santoro's grin died at once, replaced by pallid dread. He seemed to shrink into the seat. "The only secret you need concern yourself with," Valentina said, her whisper scraping like sand over every nerve in the room, "is how long you continue drawing breath while keeping such an insolent tongue. Do you find something amusing in the Vukisi nosing into my territory?" No, boss," Vito Santoro stammered. I thought you are not paid to think," she snarled, the full force of her glare pinning him to his chair. "You are paid to listen and to act. One more word from you that is not a direct answer to a direct question, and you will be scrubbing the dockyards with your own toothbrush. Are we clear?" The chorus of "yes, boss," was immediate and unanimous. She turned her glare back to the map, her focus now razor-sharp, her mind violently ejecting all thoughts of laughter and sunlight and warmth. She began to issue orders, cold, precise, and brutal. The plan was set. The Vuchis would burn. But as the men filed out, relieved to have escaped the room, Dante Marino lingered for a moment. He looked at his leader, who was now staring intently at the warehouse schematic, her posture once again that of the untouchable queen. He had seen it. The distraction, the unheard question, the fleeting softness in her eyes before the fury had slammed down. He said nothing, but as he closed the door behind him, a single quiet thought echoed in his mind. Something has changed. Everything has changed. And he wasn't sure if that was a good thing or the most dangerous thing he had ever witnessed. The change began in the deepest, most secret hours of the night. For so long, Maya's sleep had been a barren landscape, haunted by the sound of screeching tires, the stark, official voices of the police, and the devastating echoing silence of her old home. Her dreams were voids of grief, and she would often wake with a soaked pillow and a hollow chest, the reality of her loss crashing over her anew. But then the landscape of her subconscious began to shift. The cold emptiness warmed. The silence filled with a new compelling sound, the low husky cadence of a single voice. The first dream was a fragment, more sensation than narrative. She was cold, and then a warmth enveloped her from behind. Strong arms circled her waist, pulling her back against a form that was both solid and impossibly soft. A scent filled her nostrils, dark amber, clean linen, and something uniquely intoxicatingly Valentina. It was a scent of safety and power intertwined. A chin rested on her shoulder, and she felt the whisper of breath against her neck. She sighed, melting into the warmth, and for the first time since the tragedy, she felt not just safe, but desired. She woke with a start, her heart hammering, her skin tingling. The room was dark and empty, but the ghost of the sensation lingered, leaving her flushed and bewildered. The dreams became more frequent, more vivid, more audacious. She dreamt of those long, elegant fingers, which she'd seen, wield a spoon and stroke a kitten with such devastating care, tracing patterns on the inside of her wrist, moving slowly up her arm. She dreamt of that severe, beautiful mouth, the mouth that issued commands that shook the city, smiling against her own, not with softness, but with a fierce, claiming hunger. She dreamt of being pressed against the polished mahogany of Valentina's desk. The call would a shocking contrast to the heat of the body covering hers, of whispered promises that were threats and pleas all at once. They were no longer just dreams of comfort. They were dreams of possession, of being utterly and completely claimed by the most dangerous woman she had ever known. One night, the dream crossed a final explicit threshold. It was so intense, so real. She could feel the weight, the friction, the building, coiling tension that was both terrifying and the most exquisite thing she'd ever felt. A name was chanted in her mind, a prayer and a cry for release. She arched off the bed, a choked, desperate sound escaping her lips as the pleasure crested, washing over her in a wave so powerful it felt like it rewrote her very DNA. She woke up gasping. The room was pitch black. Her body was thrumming, alive, with 1,000 electric pulses. The sheets were tangled around her legs, and the evidence of her climax was a damp, warm patch between her thighs. Her skin was slick with a fine sheen of sweat, and her breath came in ragged pants. And the name she had cried out in the dream was still echoing in the silent, opulent room. Valentina. She whispered it aloud, the word, a confession in the darkness. Her face flamed with a heat that had nothing to do with the dream. It was a scorching wave of embarrassment, of shock, of sheer, unadulterated want. This wasn't a vague, warm feeling. This was a specific carnal hunger for her kidnapper, her protector, the woman who fed her soup and ruled a criminal empire. She lay there for a long time, heart slowing, body cooling, the reality of it settling deep in her bones. The fear was gone. The grief, while still a permanent resident in her heart, had been joined by something else, something vibrant and demanding. She wasn't a child to be protected anymore. She was a woman who knew what she wanted. And she wanted Valentina. The knowledge was a key, unlocking a boldness she didn't know she possessed. The next day, she watched Valentina with new eyes. She saw the graceful strength in her stride, the latent power in her hands as she sorted through documents, the way her lower lip curved when she was concentrating. Maya's stomach fluttered, not with fear, but with anticipation. Her actions became deliberate. A conscious campaign of seduction played out in the daylight. She started by invading Valentina's space in a new way. Valentina would be in her study, reading in her favorite high-backed leather chair by the fire. Maya would walk in without a word, and instead of taking the opposite chair, she would simply perch herself on the arm of Valentina's chair, her hip pressing against Valentina's shoulder. Valentina would stiffen, the paper in her hands going still. She'd grunt a warning, but Maya would just lean over ostensibly to see what she was reading, letting her hair brush against Valentina's cheek. Boring. She'd pronounce her voice a playful whisper near Valentina's ear before hopping down and sauntering out, leaving a wake of her strawberry scent and a thoroughly discomforted Mafia queen. But the pinnacle of her newfound audacity came. One afternoon, Valentina was again in her chair, this time going over security report. Maya entered, her heart pounding a rhythm of pure rebellion in her chest. She didn't stop at the arm of the chair. In one fluid, brazen motion, she turned her back to Valentina and settled herself directly into her lap. Valentina froze. The report crinkled in her suddenly tight grip. Every line of her body was a rigid line of shock. "What?" she hissed, her voice dangerously low. "Do you think you are doing?" Maya leaned back, settling against Valentina's chest as if it were the most natural place in the world. She could feel the rapid thundering beat of Valentina's heart against her back. It was a thrilling contrast to her controlled exterior. "It's more comfortable than the armrest," Maya said eerily, pretending to examine her nails. Then, she tilted her head back until her lips were inches from Valentina's ear. Her voice dropped to a husky, intimate whisper, laced with the filthiest, most delicious implication she could conjure from her dream. "I had the most vivid dream about these hands of yours last night," she murmured, feeling Valentina's breath catch. They weren't reading reports. They were busy. The effect was instantaneous and profound. Valentina didn't just stiffen. She turned to stone. Maya could have sworn the temperature in the room dropped several degrees. The silence was absolute, vibrating with tension. After a long agonizing moment, Valentina's voice came out, a rough, strained thing barely recognizable. "Kidnapping you was a mistake. It wasn't a threat of violence. It was a confession of a profound miscalculation. She had brought a vulnerable girl into her home, but the girl had brought a storm of desire with her, and Valentina had no defenses against it." Hearing the raw tension in that usually imperious voice, feeling the tremor she had caused in this unshakable woman, Maya felt a surge of pure power. She didn't get up. She just giggled, a light, bubbling sound that was entirely at odds with the charged atmosphere and snuggled back against the solid, frozen form of her captor. The game had changed, and Maya was no longer playing by Valentina's rules. The mansion at night was a different entity. The daytime rhythms of staff and business gave way to the silent, vigilant hum of security systems and the soft tread of patrols. It was a time of shadows and secrets, and Maya found a new boldness in the cover of darkness. Her daytime provocations, the whispers, the lap-sitting were mere skirmishes. Night was for the main assault. She planned it with a cunning that would have made Valentina proud. She waited until the deep powers when the silence was absolute. Slipping from her room, Eliza had notably stopped locking the door. She padded barefoot down the cold marble hall to Valentina's private wing. The guards stationed at the end of the corridor saw her. Of course, their eyes tracked her, but they made no move to stop her. Their orders, it seemed, had been quietly amended. She is allowed. Maya's heart was a wild drum against her ribs. But it was not fear that drove it. It was a heady mix of desire, defiance, and a desperate need to shatter the unbearable tension that had been building between them for weeks. She didn't knock. She simply turned the heavy brass handle and slipped inside Valentina's bedroom. The room was vast and dominated by a massive canopied bed made of dark, heavy wood. It was not a room of luxury, but of power. Spartan, clean, and severe. A single painting of a storm-tossed sea hung on one wall. A reading chair and a small table, with a half-finished glass of whiskey, were the only concessions to comfort. And in the center of the bed lay its ruler. Valentina was asleep, or had been. The moment the door clicked shut, her eyes snapped open. There was no groggy confusion. Her awareness was instantaneous and total, a predator's reflex. Her body went taut, one hand sliding under her pillow, undoubtedly toward a weapon. As her head turned, her gaze piercing the gloom to find the intruder. The moonlight streaming through the window illuminated Maya, standing just inside the door. She wore what she had chosen for this very moment, a slip of ivory silk so thin it was nearly translucent. It whispered against her thighs, the lace edging barely skimming the tops of them. The neckline plunged, and the delicate straps did little to hide the fact she wore nothing beneath. She was a vision of youthful, brazen vulnerability, backlit by the moon. Valentina's breath audibly hitched. The hand under the pillow went still. For a long suspended moment, she simply stared, her expression unreadable in the shadows, but her rigid posture speaking volumes. What is the meaning of this? Her voice was a low, dangerous rasp, growly with sleep and something else. Shock perhaps, or the effort of control. Maya took a few steps forward, the silk rustling with each movement. "I couldn't sleep," she said, her voice purposely small, a contrast to her scandalous attire. "I have bad dreams. I sleep better near you." It was a lie, and they both knew it. The dreams she had now were of the woman in the bed, and they were anything but bad. Valentina sat up slowly, the sheets pooling around her waist. She wore a simple black tank top, and the muscles in her arms and shoulders corded with tension. Maya's mouth went dry. She was so solid real. "This is unacceptable," Valentina stated, her voice regaining some of its steely authority, though it lacked its usual absolute conviction. "Return to your room now." "No," Maya said softly, and continued her advance until she stood beside the bed. She could see the conflict wearing on Valentina's face now. The sharp angles were hardened by annoyance, but her eyes were devouring Maya, tracing the lines of the silk, the shadowed curves beneath. There was a hunger there, a raw, barely leashed want that made Maya's knees feel weak. She was playing with fire, and the fire was staring back, fascinated. Without waiting for permission, Maya pulled back the heavy duvet on the empty side and slid in. The sheets were cool, smelling faintly of Valentina's signature scent, amber and linen. And her. It was an intoxicating embrace. Valentina recoiled as if scolded, shifting to the far edge of the bed. Maya, she growled, a warning so potent it vibrated in the air between them. Do not test me. I'm not testing you, Maya murmured, rolling onto her side to face Valentina's rigid back. I'm just going to sleep. You can keep your scary weapons. I feel safe here. She let her body relax into the mattress, her eyes drifting shut. She could feel the heat radiating from Valentina's body, a furnace of contained energy just inches away. The silence stretched, thick and heavy with unsaid things. She heard Valentina's breathing, too controlled, to even to be natural. Then Maya made her final move. With a sleepy sigh that was only half feigned, she shifted closer. She pressed her body against Valentina's back, molding her front to the curve of Valentina's spine. One arm snaked around Valentina's waist, her hands playing flat against the firm plane of her stomach. Feeling the hard muscles there jump and contract at the touch, she nuzzled her face into the space between Valentina's shoulder blades, her lips brushing against the soft cotton of her tank top. Good night, Valentina, she whispered, her breath warm against her skin. Valentina made a sound, then a low, guttural noise deep in her throat. It was pure, undiluted agony. It was the sound of a fortress wall, finally irrevocably cracking. Every inch of her stayed rigid, a statue carved from tortured restraint. Maya could feel her heartbeat thudding against her own forearm, a frantic, feral cadence that contradicted her stillness. For an eternity, they remained like that. Maya, feigning sleep, savoring the heat and the scent and the thrilling evidence of the effect she wielded. Valentina, holding herself so perfectly still it seemed she scarcely breathed, locked in an inner war so fierce it seemed to shake the very air surrounding them. Maya sensed the exact instant the struggle began to shift. It was not a surrender, not yet, but the iron line of Valentina's spine loosened by the faintest degree. The muscles beneath Maya's palm unclenched ever so slightly. The furious, galloping heartbeat slowed toward a steadier, deeper tempo. Valentina did not turn over. She did not draw Maya closer, but she also did not push her away. She did not rise and leave. She simply accepted. She allowed warmth, weight, and that strawberry sweetness to infiltrate her sanctuary. Maya smiled into the dark fabric of Valentina's top, a slow, victorious smile. She had breached the inner sanctum. For part 2, subscribe to our channel and ring the bell.